Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore what life was really like in medieval Germany, where ordinary people spent their days farming, surviving harsh winters, obeying powerful lords, and living in a world filled with castles, forests, and endless hard work. Imagine opening your eyes on a cold morning sometime in the year 1200. There is no electricity, no running water, and no comfortable bed waiting for you. Instead, you wake up on a simple straw mattress inside, a wooden house shared with your entire family. The room is dark except for the faint glow of a dying fire. Outside, the village is already beginning to stir. Roosters crow in the distance while smoke slowly rises from nearby homes. Most people in medieval Germany were peasants, and their lives revolved around the land. Before the sun had fully risen, many were already preparing for another long day of labour. Breakfast was usually simple: a piece of coarse bread, a bowl of porridge, or perhaps some leftover vegetables from the previous evening. Meat was a luxury that many families enjoyed only on special occasions. Hunger was a constant concern, especially after poor harvests. Once the meal was finished, work began immediately. Men headed to the fields carrying wooden tools while women remained, busy caring for children, preparing food, spinning wool, and tending small gardens. Every member of the family had responsibilities. Even young children helped with chores whenever they were able. The village itself was small and tightly connected. Most people knew each other from birth and rarely travelled beyond a few miles from home. Dense forests surrounded many settlements, providing wood for fuel, but also creating a sense of isolation. To the people living there, the outside world often felt distant and mysterious. Above them all stood the local lord, usually living in a fortified manor or castle. Peasants worked his land and paid taxes in exchange for protection. Life was difficult, but questioning this system was almost unthinkable. It was simply the way the world had always been. As church bells echoed across the countryside, villagers were constantly reminded that religion shaped every aspect of their existence. Faith provided comfort during times of hardship, and nearly every important event in life was connected to the church. The church was far more than a place of worship. It served as the centre of village life where people gathered, shared news, celebrated holidays, and sought guidance during difficult times. Most villagers could not read or write, so the priest was often one of the few educated people they would ever meet. His words carried great authority. For many peasants, life followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought planting, summer demanded endless labour beneath the sun. Autumn was harvest time, and winter tested everyone's ability to survive. A successful harvest meant food for the coming months, while a poor one could lead to hunger and desperation. There were no supermarkets to rely on when crops failed. Every sack of grain mattered. During the warmer months, the fields became the centre of activity. Farmers worked from sunrise until sunset, guiding oxen through the soil and tending crops by hand. The work was exhausting and often left people physically worn out. Before they reached old age, injuries were common, and without modern medicine, even a small wound could become dangerous. Life expectancy was much lower than it is today. Yet despite the hardships, moments of joy still existed. Religious festivals, weddings, and local fairs brought excitement to otherwise difficult lives. On these special days, villagers wore their best clothing, shared food, listened to music, and enjoyed rare opportunities to relax. Children played simple games while adults exchanged stories and gossip. For a short time, worries about work and survival seemed less important. Meanwhile, towering castles watched over the countryside. Behind their thick stone walls lived nobles whose lives were very different from those of ordinary peasants. Noble families enjoyed better food, larger homes, and greater security. They trained for warfare, managed lands, and often spent much of their lives involved in political struggles. Knights practiced combat from a young age, preparing themselves for battles that could erupt at any moment. Although castles looked impressive, they were not always comfortable places to live. Stone walls trapped cold air during winter, and fires were often the only source of warmth. Even wealthy nobles faced challenges that modern people would find difficult. Still, compared to the average peasant, they lived in a world of privilege and opportunity that seemed almost unimaginable. Beyond the villages and castles, vast forests covered much of medieval Germany. These forests provided timber, firewood, wild berries, mushrooms, and game animals. But they also inspired fear. Stories of wolves, bandits, and mysterious spirits were passed from generation to generation. Travelling through the woods alone was considered dangerous, especially after sunset. Most people preferred to stay close to familiar roads whenever possible. Travel itself was slow and difficult. Roads were often little more than muddy. Tracks that became nearly impassable during bad weather. A journey that takes a few hours today could require several days in the middle. Ages. Because of this, many villagers spent their entire lives without seeing a large city. Their world was limited to nearby settlements, fields, forests, and the local church. When merchants arrived from distant regions, they brought not only goods but also stories from faraway places. These visitors were often welcomed with great curiosity. Cities, however, were beginning to grow. Places such as Cologne, Nuremberg, and Augsburg became important centres of trade. Within city walls, craftsmen worked as blacksmiths, carpenters, bakers, and shoemakers. Markets bustled with activity as merchants sold cloth, spices, tools, and livestock. Compared to village life, cities offered more opportunities, but they also came with new dangers. Streets were crowded, sanitation was poor, and disease could spread quickly among the population. Fire was another constant threat. Most buildings were made from wood, and a single spark could destroy entire neighbourhoods. People lived with risks that were simply accepted as part of everyday life. Disease remained one of the greatest fears throughout medieval Germany. Without modern medicine, illnesses that are easily treated today could become deadly. Doctors had limited knowledge, and many remedies were based on tradition rather than science. During outbreaks, entire communities sometimes watched helplessly as friends and relatives became sick. Yet people continued with their daily lives because survival required it. They worked, prayed, married, raised children, and hoped for a better future. For all its hardships, medieval Germany was a world filled with strong communities, shared traditions, and remarkable resilience. The people who lived there faced challenges that would seem overwhelming today, yet they found ways to endure them year after year, generation after generation. As evening approached, life in medieval Germany changed dramatically. Without electric lights, darkness arrived quickly and transformed the landscape. Villagers hurried to finish their tasks before sunset. Animals were brought into shelters, tools were stored away, and families gathered inside their homes. Once night fell, only the faint glow of candles, oil lamps, or the fire in the hearth pushed back the darkness. For most people, these few hours after sunset were among the rare moments of rest in an otherwise exhausting life. Families sat together around the fire, sharing simple meals and stories. Parents taught children lessons about faith, hard work, and proper behaviour. Grandparents passed down local legends that had been told for generations. Some stories spoke of brave knights and noble kings, while others warned about dangerous creatures, said to wander forests and lonely roads after dark. In a world with little scientific understanding, such tales felt very real. Winter was often the most difficult season. Snow and freezing temperatures could isolate villages for weeks. Food supplies had to last until spring, and every family worried about whether their stores would be enough. Fresh vegetables became scarce, and diets relied heavily on preserved foods, grain, and whatever livestock could be maintained through the cold months. Illness spread more easily when people spent long periods crowded together indoors. Yet winter also brought moments of celebration. Christmas and other religious festivals offered hope during the darkest time of year. Churches filled with worshippers, and communities gathered to share what little they had. Music, prayers, and special meals helped lift spirits. These occasions reminded people that they were not facing hardship alone. Marriage was another important part of life. Most people married young by modern standards. Weddings were community events involving families, neighbours, and church ceremonies. Marriage was not only about love, but also about survival, cooperation, and building a household capable of managing daily responsibilities. Children were expected to contribute from an early age, learning skills that would prepare them for adulthood. Education was limited for ordinary people, while some noble children and future clergy received formal instruction. Most peasants learned through experience. Knowledge passed from parents to children, from masters to apprentices, and from elders to younger generations. Practical skills mattered far more than books. Knowing how to grow crops, repair tools, care for animals, and survive harsh conditions was essential. In many ways, medieval Germany was a world defined by hard work, faith, tradition, and community. Life was uncertain, often difficult, and sometimes dangerous. But the people who lived there built families, villages, and cultures that would shape German history for centuries to come. For those born into noble families, life looked very different from that of the average peasant, though it was not always as glamorous as modern movies suggest. Young noble boys began learning the skills of warfare at an early age. They practiced riding horses, handling weapons, and understanding the responsibilities expected of future knights. Strength, loyalty, and military ability were highly valued qualities. By contrast, noble girls were often taught how to manage households, supervise servants, and maintain the social connections that helped powerful families remain influential. Castles served as both homes and defensive fortresses. Their thick stone walls protected residents from attack, but daily life inside could still be uncomfortable. Rooms were often cold, smoke from fireplaces drifted through hallways, and privacy remained limited even among the wealthy. Servants worked constantly to prepare food, clean living spaces, care for animals, and support the needs of the noble household. A castle was like a small community functioning behind protective walls. Food played an important role in displaying status, while peasants survived on bread, porridge, vegetables, and occasional meat. Nobles enjoyed larger feasts featuring venison, pork, fish, poultry, and imported spices. These meals were opportunities to demonstrate wealth and power. Guests might travel long distances to attend important celebrations, political meetings, or religious events hosted by noble families. Yet, even nobles faced risks. Political rivalries could lead to conflicts. Alliances shifted frequently, and warfare was a constant possibility. A powerful family one year could lose much of its influence the next. Security was never guaranteed. Across the countryside, smaller disputes between lords sometimes erupted into violence, affecting nearby villages and trade routes. Warfare itself was an unavoidable part of medieval life. Armies moved slowly compared to modern standards, but their arrival could completely disrupt local communities. Peasants often suffered the most during conflicts. Fields were damaged, livestock was taken, and homes could be destroyed. For ordinary people, war was not a grand adventure, but a frightening event that threatened survival. Despite these dangers, trade continued to connect different regions. Merchants travelled with wagons loaded with cloth, salt, wine, metal goods, and other valuable products. Rivers became important transportation routes, helping towns grow richer and more influential. Markets expanded, bringing new opportunities and slowly changing medieval society, while most villages remained tied to traditional ways of life. The movement of goods, people, and ideas was gradually transforming Germany. These changes were slow enough that few individuals noticed them, but over generations they would help shape a very different future from the one their ancestors had known. Religion remained at the heart of nearly every important decision people made. Church bells marked the passage of time, calling communities to prayer and reminding them of religious duties. Baptisms, weddings, and funerals all took place under the guidance of the Church. For many medieval Germans, the world was deeply connected to spiritual beliefs. Good harvests, storms, illness, and even unexpected accidents were often understood through a religious lens. People prayed not only for themselves but also for their families, crops, animals, and entire villages. Monasteries played an important role throughout the German lands. These religious communities housed monks who devoted their lives to prayer, study, and work. Some monasteries became centres of learning where valuable books were copied by hand. In an age before printing presses, creating a single manuscript required enormous effort and patience. Monks spent countless hours carefully writing texts that preserved knowledge for future generations. Beyond their religious duties, monasteries often provided aid to travellers, the poor and the sick. While most ordinary villagers could not read, knowledge still existed within these institutions. Nature also shaped every aspect of life. A late frost could destroy crops. Heavy rain could flood fields. Drought could reduce harvests and create hunger. Modern people often take control over their environment for granted. But medieval communities depended heavily on weather conditions. They could neither predict nor influence, because survival was so closely tied to nature. Seasonal changes carried tremendous importance. People watched the skies, observed animal behaviour, and relied on experience passed down through generations. Superstitions flourished alongside religious beliefs. Many villagers carried charms for protection or followed traditions believed to bring good fortune. Certain forests, springs, and ancient ruins were sometimes associated with mysterious stories, although church leaders discouraged many of these beliefs. They remained part of everyday life in numerous communities. The line between faith, folklore, and local tradition was often blurred. Entertainment was rare compared to modern standards, but it still existed. Travelling musicians, storytellers, and performers occasionally visited towns and villages. Their arrival brought excitement to people whose lives were usually filled with routine labour. Songs, dances, and tales of distant lands offered a brief escape from daily hardships. Children listened with fascination, while adults enjoyed hearing news from places they would likely never see themselves. Through these small moments of joy, medieval Germans found ways to balance the demands of a challenging existence. Life was difficult, but it was not without laughter, friendship, celebration, and hope. Even in a world of uncertainty, people continued to build meaningful lives, creating traditions and communities that endured long after they were gone. One of the greatest challenges facing medieval Germans was the constant threat of disease. Without modern hospitals, antibiotics, or a scientific understanding of germs, even common illnesses could become deadly. A simple infection from a small cut might spread throughout the body. Fevers often frightened entire families because few effective treatments existed. People relied on herbal remedies, prayers, and the knowledge of local healers. Some treatments provided comfort, while others had little effect at all. When sickness entered a village, fear spread quickly. Families watched over loved ones, hoping they would recover, while neighbours prayed for protection. Life expectancy was much shorter than it is today, and death was a familiar part of everyday life. Yet people learned to endure these realities because they had no alternative. The most devastating outbreaks left deep scars on communities for generations. During difficult times, many people turned to pilgrimage. Pilgrims travelled long distances to visit holy sites, seeking spiritual guidance, forgiveness, or healing. These journeys were often dangerous. Roads could be rough, bandits sometimes targeted travellers, and harsh weather created additional challenges. Despite these risks, thousands of people undertook such journeys because faith played such a central role in their lives. Along the roads, travellers exchanged stories, ideas, and news from distant regions, helping connect communities that would otherwise remain isolated. Education slowly expanded, though opportunities remained limited. Cathedral schools and monasteries trained clergy and a small number of educated individuals. Latin served as the language of scholarship, religion, and official documents. Most ordinary people never learned it, but educated members of society used it to communicate. Across different regions of Europe, knowledge moved slowly, copied by hand from one manuscript to another. Every book represented months or even years of careful work. Because books were rare and expensive, learning was considered a valuable privilege. Meanwhile, the natural world remained a powerful presence in daily life. Forests provided resources, rivers supported trade, and fertile land determined prosperity, people paid close attention to seasonal cycles because their survival depended upon them. A good year could bring relative comfort, while a series of poor harvests could lead to widespread hardship. Communities celebrated successful harvests with gratitude and festivals, recognizing how much depended upon favourable conditions. Looking across medieval Germany, it becomes clear that life demanded patience, endurance, and cooperation. Whether someone lived in a small village, a growing town, or a noble castle, challenges were unavoidable. Yet generation after generation adapted to changing circumstances, preserving traditions, while gradually shaping a society that would continue evolving long after the Middle Ages came to an end. Their world was not easy, but it was filled with determination, faith, and an enduring will to survive. For many people, the changing of the seasons felt almost like the turning of a giant wheel that controlled their lives. Spring brought hope as fields were prepared and seeds planted. Summer demanded long hours of labour beneath the sun. Autumn was a season of urgency, when every crop needed to be gathered before cold weather arrived. Then winter returned once again, bringing shorter days and new challenges. This cycle repeated year after year, shaping the rhythm of life for generations. Children grew up quickly in such an environment. From a young age they learned practical skills by watching parents and older relatives. Boys might help in fields or care for animals, while girls assisted with household tasks, food preparation, and textile work. Childhood existed, but responsibilities arrived much earlier than most people would expect today. Every pair of hands contributed to the survival of the family. Despite the hardships, people still found reasons to celebrate. Weddings, harvest festivals, religious holidays, and community gatherings provided moments of happiness. Music echoed through village squares, neighbours shared meals, and stories were told late into the evening. These occasions strengthened social bonds and reminded people that life contained more than work alone. Even in difficult times, laughter and friendship remained important parts of daily existence. As the Middle Ages continued, gradual changes began appearing across the German lands. Trade expanded, towns became wealthier, and new ideas slowly spread from one region to another. Most people could not see the larger transformation taking place around them, but history was quietly moving forward. The world their descendants would inherit would look very different from the one they knew. Yet, for the ordinary villager standing in a field, tending crops beneath the open sky, such changes felt distant. Their focus remained on family, faith, community, and the simple challenge of making it through another season. In more ways, that determination defined life in medieval Germany more than anything else. As medieval society developed, large churches and cathedrals began rising above many towns. These impressive structures required years, sometimes decades, to complete. Stonecutters, carpenters, blacksmiths, and countless labourers worked together on projects that seemed almost impossible. For ordinary people, these buildings were symbols of faith and community pride. Their tall towers could often be seen from miles away, guiding travellers across the countryside. Inside, colourful stained glass, windows and religious artwork created an atmosphere unlike anything most villagers experienced elsewhere. At the same time, nature remained unpredictable. Storms could flatten crops, rivers could overflow their banks, and long winters could exhaust food supplies. People understood that no matter how hard they worked, some things remained beyond their control. This uncertainty encouraged strong community ties. Neighbours helped one another during difficult periods because everyone knew that hardship could arrive without warning. A family that needed assistance one year might be helping others the next. Hospitality was also important. Travellers, merchants, and pilgrims frequently moved between settlements, bringing news from distant places. When strangers arrived, villagers were often eager to hear stories about regions they would never visit themselves. Tales of great cities, foreign rulers, and distant conflicts sparked curiosity and imagination. In a world without modern communication, such stories provided a rare glimpse beyond local boundaries. Yet most people remained deeply connected to their homes. The village where they were born often became the place where they lived their entire lives. Familiar fields, forests, and roads formed the centre of their world. Generations of the same family sometimes occupied the same area for centuries. This created a strong sense of belonging and continuity. Looking back today, it is easy to focus only on the hardships of medieval Germany. Life was certainly demanding, and comfort was limited by modern standards. But it was also a world filled with close communities, shared traditions, and people who found meaning in family, faith, and daily work. They faced challenges that would seem overwhelming to many of us. Yet they continued forward with remarkable resilience. Through countless ordinary lives, they helped build the foundations of the Germany that would emerge in later centuries. As the later Middle Ages approached, the German lands became increasingly connected through trade, religion, and politics. Merchants travelled more frequently between towns, carrying goods that many villagers had never seen before. Salt, cloth, metal tools, and luxury items moved along roads and rivers, linking communities that had once felt isolated from one another. Some towns prospered greatly from this growing trade, attracting craftsmen, merchants, and new opportunities. Wealth remained unevenly distributed, but economic activity slowly expanded across many regions. For ordinary people, however, daily life still revolved around familiar routines. Fields needed tending, animals required care, and households depended on constant labour. Most villagers measured time not by calendars but by seasons, church festivals, and agricultural tasks. Their concerns were practical and immediate. Would the harvest be successful? Would the family remain healthy through winter? Would there be enough food stored for the months ahead? These questions mattered far more than distant political events. Old age was relatively rare compared to modern standards, but elders who reached it often held respected positions within their communities. They carried memories of past harvests, harsh winters, local traditions, and important events. Younger generations listened to their advice, because experience could mean the difference between success and failure. Knowledge was not usually found in books, but in people who had spent decades learning from life itself. As evening settled over villages and towns, the pace of life slowed. Fires crackled inside homes while darkness covered the countryside. families gathered together after long days of work. Outside, forests stood silent beneath the night sky, and distant church bells occasionally echoed through the air. In these quiet moments, people reflected on their lives much as we do today. They worried about the future, cared for loved ones, celebrated small victories, and hoped for better days ahead. Although separated from us by centuries, medieval Germans were not so different in their emotions and dreams. Their world lacked modern technology, but it was filled with determination, faith, friendship, and the enduring desire to build a meaningful life. And so, beneath the shadows of castles and the towers of ancient churches, generation after generation continued their journey through the ever-changing story of medieval Germany. Not everyone spent their entire lives in villages or towns. Some people chose a very different path by entering monasteries or convents. These religious communities followed strict routines centered around prayer, work, and study. Days were carefully organized, with bells signaling when to wake, pray, eat, and rest. For many, such places offered a life of stability in an often uncertain world. Monks cultivated gardens, copied manuscripts, cared for the sick, and preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Their quiet work would influence future generations in ways they could never fully imagine. Meanwhile, rivers remained some of the most important highways in medieval Germany. Long before railways or modern roads, boats carried goods and travellers across large distances. Settlements located along major rivers often became prosperous because trade flowed through them. Riverbanks bustled with activity as merchants loaded cargo, fishermen cast nets, and travellers prepared for journeys. These waterways connected distant regions and helped ideas spread throughout the German lands. Weather continued to shape nearly every aspect of life. A warm spring could encourage healthy crops, while severe storms might undo months of hard work in a matter of hours. People watched nature closely because their livelihoods depended on it. Many traditions developed around planting and harvesting seasons, blending practical knowledge with local customs. Communities celebrated good years with gratitude and endured difficult years with patience and cooperation. Through all these experiences, one thing remained constant: the importance of community. Whether facing illness, poor harvests, harsh winters, or unexpected challenges, people relied on one another. Neighbours shared tools, exchanged labour, and provided support during times of need. Survival often depended not only on individual effort, but also on collective strength. In many ways, this sense of mutual dependence formed the foundation of medieval society. As centuries passed, countless lives unfolded across the German countryside. Most of these people never became famous, never commanded armies, and never ruled kingdoms. Yet their daily efforts shaped the world around them. They built homes, raised families, worked the land, practiced their faith, and carried traditions forward, though history often remembers kings and battles. The true story of medieval Germany was also written by ordinary men and women whose quiet perseverance helped sustain an entire civilization through generations of change. Life in medieval Germany was also shaped by the many markets and fairs that appeared throughout the year. These events were far more than places to buy and sell goods. They were opportunities for people from different villages and towns to meet, exchange news and experience something beyond their normal routines. For a peasant who rarely travelled, visiting a large fair could feel like entering a completely different world. Stalls displayed goods from distant regions. Musicians performed for crowds, and merchants advertised their products with loud voices. The atmosphere was often filled with excitement and curiosity. Animals played a vital role in everyday survival. Horses helped with transportation. Oxen pulled ploughs. Sheep provided wool. And chickens supplied eggs. Caring for livestock required constant attention throughout the year. During winter kingimals, alive could be almost as important as preserving food for the family itself. Losing valuable livestock to disease or harsh weather could create serious hardship. Because of this, animals were often considered one of a family's most important possessions. Clothing was simple for most people. Peasants wore garments made from wool or linen, materials that could be produced locally. Clothes were practical rather than fashionable, designed to withstand hard labour and changing weather. A single outfit might be worn for years before being replaced. Nobles, however, displayed their wealth through finer fabrics, brighter colours, and more elaborate designs. Clothing could immediately reveal a person's social status. Even from a distance, people often knew whether someone was wealthy or poor, simply by looking at what they wore. Time itself was experienced differently than it is today. Without watches or smartphones, people organised their days according to natural rhythms. Sunrise signalled the beginning of work, while sunset brought most activities to an end. Church bells helped communities keep track of important moments throughout the day. Life moved at a slower pace, shaped by seasons rather than schedules. Looking back across the centuries, medieval Germany appears both distant and familiar. The castles, villages, forests, and traditions belong to another age. Yet the people themselves shared many of the same hopes found in every generation. They wanted safety for their families, enough food to survive, meaningful friendships, and reasons to hope for the future. Their world was often difficult, but through patience, hard work, and cooperation they created communities that endured for centuries, leaving behind a legacy that can still be seen across Germany today. As we come closer to the end of our journey through medieval Germany, it is worth remembering how different the concept of comfort was during that era. Today, many people expect warm homes, clean water, instant communication, and easy transportation. Medieval Germans lived without any of these conveniences. Everyday tasks required time, effort, and patience. Water had to be carried, food had to be prepared from basic ingredients, and travel demanded significant planning. Yet people adapted because they knew no other way of life. Their expectations were shaped by the world around them. Communities also developed strong traditions that helped create a sense of identity. Seasonal festivals, religious celebrations, local customs, and family gatherings connected people to one another. These traditions offered stability during uncertain times, even when harvests failed or political conflicts created difficulties. Familiar customs reminded people that they belonged to something larger than themselves. Such connections provided comfort that could not be measured in material wealth alone. The landscape itself left a lasting impression on those who lived there. Dense forests, rolling hills, fertile valleys, and winding rivers formed the backdrop of daily life. People knew these places intimately. They recognized familiar paths through the woods, understood local weather patterns, and remembered stories associated with particular locations. The natural world was not something separate from human life. It was woven into every activity, every season, and every generation. Throughout the centuries, countless individuals lived and died without leaving there. Names in history books. They were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, servants, monks, mothers, fathers, and children. Most never travelled far from home, yet their efforts shaped the communities around them. They built houses, cultivated fields, maintained traditions, and passed knowledge to the next generation. The world they created became the foundation upon which later German society would grow. When we imagine medieval Germany today, it is easy to picture castles and knights. But the true story belongs equally to ordinary people whose daily work kept society functioning. Their lives were challenging, their opportunities limited, and their future uncertain. Yet they faced these realities with determination and resilience. In doing so, they left behind a remarkable legacy of endurance that continues to fascinate us centuries later. And as night settles once more over the medieval countryside, with distant church bells echoing across the dark landscape, we leave this world behind and allow its story to slowly fade into the quiet of history. Even after the Middle Ages eventually came to an end, many traditions from medieval Germany continued to influence everyday life for centuries. Villages remained important centres of community. Churches continued to shape local culture, and many ancient roads still connected towns across the countryside. Some castles that once protected noble families survived long after their military importance faded, standing as reminders of an earlier age. People who lived in later generations often looked back on the medieval period through stories, legends, and local traditions that had been passed down over time. Legends were especially powerful in the German lands. Tales of hidden treasures, mysterious forests, brave knights, and wandering spirits became part of local folklore. Around evening fires, families shared these stories with children, ensuring that memories of the past remained alive. Some legends changed with every generation, growing more dramatic as they were retold. Others became so deeply rooted in local culture that they survived for hundreds of years. Many of the famous fairy tales collected centuries later had their roots in traditions that stretched back to medieval times. The medieval world was also filled with sounds that modern people rarely hear. Church bells echoed across valleys. Blacksmiths hammered metal inside workshops. Horses pulled carts along rough roads. Merchants called out in crowded markets. Farmers worked in fields while birds sang from nearby forests. At night, the absence of engines and electric devices created a level of quiet that is difficult to imagine today. Darkness covered the countryside, interrupted only by moonlight, stars, and the occasional glow of a distant fire. For the people living there, this was simply normal life. Looking across the entire medieval period, one thing becomes clear. Life was not defined by a single event or a famous ruler. Instead, it was built from millions of ordinary days. Days spent planting crops, repairing homes, raising children, attending church, sharing meals, and helping neighbours. These small moments rarely appear in history books. Yet together they formed the true foundation of medieval Germany. Through hardship and success, peace and conflict, generation after generation continued forward, creating a world whose influence can still be felt in Germany today. If you could spend just one day in medieval Germany, the first thing you would probably notice is how physically demanding life was. Nearly every task required human or animal labour. There were no machines to harvest fields, no vehicles to carry heavy loads, and no electrical tools to make work easier. Even simple activities such as preparing a meal involved gathering wood, lighting a fire, carrying water, and spending hours cooking. People developed strong bodies not because they exercised for recreation, but because survival itself demanded constant effort. Yet despite the hardships, many individuals found satisfaction in the skills they mastered. A blacksmith took pride in crafting durable tools. A carpenter valued a well-built house. Farmers celebrated successful harvests after months of labour. Achievement was often measured through practical contributions to family and community rather than personal wealth alone. This sense of purpose helped people endure challenges that might otherwise have seemed overwhelming. The night sky was another part of life that appeared very different from today. Without electric lights, stars filled the darkness in astonishing numbers. Villagers could look upward and see countless points of light stretching across the heavens. The moon provided illumination for travellers and workers, while seasonal constellations helped mark the passage of time. Many people felt a deep connection to the natural world because it surrounded them every day and every night. Silence was also more common outside towns and villages. Vast areas of countryside remained untouched by the noise of modern civilization. Forests rustled in the wind, rivers flowed steadily through valleys, and wildlife moved through the landscape. These sounds formed the background of everyday existence. Although life could be difficult, there were moments of beauty that people appreciated in their own way. Looking back, medieval Germany was neither a land of constant misery nor a fairy tale kingdom filled only with castles and knights. It was a complex world inhabited by ordinary people trying to build meaningful lives under challenging circumstances. Their experiences remind us that history is not only about rulers and battles, but also about countless individuals whose daily efforts shaped the world around them. Through their work, traditions, beliefs, and determination, they left behind a story that continues to fascinate us centuries later. As centuries passed, the people of medieval Germany continued, adapting to a changing world while holding tightly to many old traditions. New trade routes appeared, towns expanded, and opportunities slowly increased for certain groups. Yet for most families, daily life still centered around familiar routines that had existed for generations. The rhythm of work, worship, and community remained remarkably consistent. This stability gave people a sense of order in a world where many things were uncertain. One of the strongest influences on daily life was the idea of belonging. A person belonged to a family, a village, a parish, and a local community. These connections shaped identity from birth until death. Individuals rarely viewed themselves as completely independent. Instead, they understood that survival depended on cooperation and mutual support. Whether repairing a damaged roof, harvesting crops before a storm, or helping neighbours during illness, people worked together because everyone benefited when the community remained strong. Hospitality was often valued as well. Travellers arriving from distant places could bring valuable information, news, and opportunities for trade. While strangers were approached with caution, they were also sources of curiosity. Stories from faraway regions allowed villagers to imagine worlds beyond their own experiences. Such encounters expanded horizons, even for people who never left their local area. Over time, medieval Germans witnessed changes they could not fully understand. Children grew into adults, villages slowly developed, and traditions evolved from one generation to the next. Most of these changes happened gradually, almost unnoticed by those living through them. Yet history was constantly moving forward. The decisions made by ordinary people, repeated day after day across countless communities, contributed to larger transformations taking place throughout Europe. In the end, the story of medieval Germany is not simply about castles, knights, or famous rulers. It is about millions of ordinary lives woven together across centuries. Farmers working fields beneath open skies, craftsmen shaping useful objects, families gathering around evening fires, and communities supporting one another through good times and bad. Their world may seem distant, but the hopes that guided them remain familiar. They sought security, belonging, purpose, and a better future for their children. These timeless desires connect us to people who lived hundreds of years ago, reminding us that while history changes, human nature often remains surprisingly similar. Perhaps one of the most surprising things about medieval Germany is how much patience was required in everyday life. Nearly everything took longer than it does today. Messages travelled slowly, journeys lasted days or weeks, and even simple projects could require months of work. People learned to think in terms of seasons rather than hours. A field planted in spring would not provide food until autumn. A young apprentice might spend years learning a trade before becoming a skilled craftsman. Large buildings, such as churches and castles, could take decades to complete, sometimes continuing long after the people who started them had passed away. This slower pace shaped the way people viewed the world. Time was not something to rush through, but something to live within. Communities measured life through recurring events, planting, harvests, religious festivals, marriages, and births. These milestones gave structure to existence and helped connect generations. Grandparents, parents, and children often shared experiences that followed similar patterns, creating a strong sense of continuity. Respect for tradition played a major role in maintaining social stability. Customs passed from one generation to another provided guidance for everything from farming practices to community celebrations. While change did occur, it usually happened gradually. People often trusted methods that had worked for their ancestors because survival depended upon reliable knowledge. Innovation existed, but tradition remained deeply valued. Even during periods of hardship, people continued finding ways to create beauty. Churches were decorated with artwork. Songs were sung during celebrations, and skilled craftsmen produced objects of remarkable quality. These achievements remind us that medieval life was not only about survival. It was also about creativity, faith, and the desire to leave something meaningful behind. Across villages, towns, monasteries, and castles, countless individuals contributed to a culture that reflected both practical needs and human imagination. As we look back across the centuries, medieval Germany appears as a world shaped by perseverance. Its people faced challenges that modern society has largely overcome. Yet they built communities capable of enduring for generations. Through work, cooperation, and determination, they created lives filled with purpose despite uncertainty. Their story continues to fascinate us because it reveals not only how different the past was, but also how much we still share with those who came before us. Beneath different circumstances, the same human hopes and struggles remained at the heart of everyday life. As medieval life moved steadily forward, people rarely stopped to think about how future generations might remember them. They were too busy dealing with the realities of their own time. Each morning brought new responsibilities, and each season presented fresh challenges. Yet, without realizing it, these ordinary men and women were helping shape the history of an entire region. Every bridge built, every field cultivated, and every family raised contributed to the development of the German lands over hundreds of years. Memory was preserved differently than it is today. There were no photographs, recordings, or digital archives. Instead, stories carried history from one generation to the next. Parents told children about important events they had witnessed. Elders shared memories of severe winters, successful harvests, and remarkable individuals from the past. In this way, communities maintained a connection with earlier generations. Some stories changed over time, while others remained surprisingly consistent. Through spoken tradition, people preserved lessons, warnings, and values that they believed were important. Nature continued to influence daily existence in countless ways. The arrival of spring brought relief after long winters. Summer filled fields with activity and growth, autumn provided rewards for months of labour, while winter encouraged families to spend more time together indoors. These seasonal rhythms affected not only work but also emotions, expectations, and community life. The passing of the year felt deeply connected to survival itself. For many medieval Germans, happiness was often found in simple things: a healthy harvest, a successful marriage, the birth of a child, or a peaceful gathering with neighbours could bring great satisfaction. Such moments reminded people that life contained joy alongside hardship, even in difficult circumstances. Individuals continued to celebrate achievements and look forward to better days. Their resilience allowed communities to endure challenges that might otherwise have broken them. Looking across the entire medieval era, it becomes clear that its greatest story is not one of kings or battles alone. It is the story of ordinary people adapting to the world around them, supporting one another, and finding meaning in everyday life. Their experiences formed the foundation upon which later generations would build. Though centuries have passed, the traces of their lives remain visible in ancient towns, old churches, historic castles, and enduring traditions. Through these reminders, the voices of medieval Germany continue to echo softly across time, inviting us to remember a world that was both distant and deeply human. And so, as another day comes to an end in medieval Germany, the countryside slowly grows quiet. The last workers return home. Animals settle into their shelters, and small fires glow behind wooden walls. Above the villages, stars begin appearing one by one across the night sky. For the people living here, tomorrow will likely look much like today. There will be fields to tend, tools to repair, meals to prepare, and responsibilities to fulfill. Life is demanding, but its routines provide a sense of stability that helps communities endure. Inside homes, families gather around the warmth of the hearth. Conversations drift from daily work to local news, family concerns, and plans for the future. Children listen as older relatives share stories they have heard many times before. These evenings strengthen bonds between generations and preserve traditions that might otherwise disappear. In a world without modern entertainment, human connection remains one of the most valuable sources of comfort. Beyond the villages, castles stand watch over the landscape. Their towers rise above forests and rivers, visible reminders of power and authority. Yet, even within those stone walls, people experience many of the same emotions as the peasants below. They worry about family, health, safety, and the uncertainty of what lies ahead. Wealth changes circumstances, but it does not remove the basic concerns that accompany human life. As the years pass, countless individuals will come and go. New children will be born, families will grow, and communities will continue adapting to changing conditions. Some years will bring prosperity, while others will bring hardship. Through it all, life moves forward. This quiet persistence may be the most remarkable feature of medieval Germany. Despite wars, disease, harsh weather, and limited resources, people continue building. working, believing, and hoping. Their world is far removed from our own, yet it offers an important reminder. History is not only created by famous rulers or dramatic events. It is also shaped by ordinary people who rise each morning and do what is necessary for their families and communities. The farmers, craftsmen, merchants, mothers, fathers, and children of medieval Germany may never have imagined that future generations would be interested in their lives. Yet their experiences remain one of the most fascinating parts of the past. Through their determination and resilience, they left behind a legacy that still speaks to us today. Centuries after the last medieval village bell faded into the night. As we linger a little longer in this medieval world, imagine walking along a narrow path between fields just before dawn. The air is cool, the ground is damp with morning dew, and a light mist hangs over the countryside. In the distance, the silhouette of a church tower rises above the village roofs. Soon the day will begin again, just as it has for generations. There is something timeless about this scene, something that countless people experienced long before the modern age arrived. The people of medieval Germany lived close to the realities of nature. They understood the signs of changing weather, recognized the sounds of local animals, and knew which plants could be useful or dangerous. Much of their knowledge came not from books but from observation and experience. Parents taught children what they had learned from their own parents, creating a chain of practical wisdom that stretched back through many generations. Community reputation mattered greatly. Because villages were small, people often knew one another well. Trust was valuable, and a person's actions could influence how they were viewed for many years. Cooperation helped communities survive, while serious conflicts could disrupt village life for a long time. As a result, maintaining good relationships was often considered extremely important. Neighbors depended on one another during harvests, building projects, and times of crisis. Even though many people rarely traveled far from home, they still possessed a sense of curiosity about the wider world. Travelers returning from distant places brought stories of large cities, powerful rulers, and unusual customs. Such tales sparked imagination and wonder. For villagers gathered around an evening fire, these stories offered a glimpse into lands they would probably never see themselves. The world beyond the horizon seemed vast, mysterious, and full of possibilities. Yet, for most people, true happiness remained rooted in familiar places. It could be found in a successful harvest, a healthy family, a peaceful season, or the companionship of trusted friends. These simple joys helped balance the many difficulties of medieval life. Looking back today, we can see that although technology and society have changed dramatically, many human desires remain the same. People then, as now, searched for security, belonging, purpose, and hope. And in the villages, towns, forests, and castles of medieval Germany, they pursued those goals one ordinary day at a time, leaving behind a story that continues to echo through history. If we could listen carefully to the voices of medieval Germany, We would hear countless personal stories hidden beneath the larger events of history. We would hear the farmer hoping for rain after weeks of dry weather. We would hear the apprentice dreaming of becoming a master craftsman one day. We would hear parents worrying about their children and elderly grandparents sharing memories from decades earlier. These quiet, human experiences rarely appear in official records, yet they formed the true heart of medieval life. For many people, life was lived within a relatively small area, but that did not mean it lacked meaning or depth. Familiar roads, nearby forests, local churches, and neighbouring villages became part of a person's identity. Every hill, stream, and pathway carried memories. People developed strong attachments to places they knew well because those places shaped nearly every aspect of their lives. Home was not simply a location. It was a network of relationships, traditions, and shared experiences. Throughout the year, religious festivals brought welcome changes to ordinary routines. Special church services, communal meals, and celebrations allowed people to pause from their daily labour. These occasions strengthened community ties and provided moments of joy that many looked forward to for months. Music, prayer, conversation, and shared food created memories that stayed with families long after the festivities ended. Meanwhile, generations continued passing through the cycle of life. Children grew into adults. Adults became parents. Parents eventually became elders whose advice guided younger members of the community. This continuous flow connected the past to the future. Traditions survived because people actively taught them to those who came after them. In Sisvir, communities maintained a sense of continuity even as individual lives came and went. When modern people imagine the Middle Ages, they often focus on dramatic images of castles, knights, and battles. Yet much of medieval history unfolded far from battlefields. It happened in fields where crops were planted, in workshops where tools were made, in homes where families gathered, and in churches where communities worshipped together. These ordinary places shaped the experiences of millions of people across centuries. The story of medieval Germany is therefore not only a story of power and politics. It is also a story of everyday perseverance. It is about people who faced uncertainty with courage, adapted to challenges, and continued building lives filled with purpose. Their world may seem distant, but their determination, hopes, and dreams remain surprisingly familiar. Across the centuries, their quiet legacy still reminds us of the strength found in ordinary human lives. As night settles once more over the medieval German countryside, the pace of life slows to a gentle rhythm. Fires burn lower inside homes. Conversations become quieter, and many people prepare for sleep after another long day of work. Outside, darkness covers fields, forests, and winding roads. Without modern lights, the world feels larger and more mysterious. The sounds of the day gradually fade, replaced by the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through trees, and the occasional bark of a village dog. For medieval people, the night could be both peaceful and unsettling. Darkness limited movement and made travel difficult. Most people preferred to remain indoors after sunset unless absolutely necessary. Stories about wandering spirits, strange creatures, and unexplained events often became more believable in the shadows of night. Whether such tales were true mattered less than the feelings they created. They reflected the uncertainty of a world where many things remained unknown. Yet night was also a time for rest and reflection. After hours of physical labour, people welcomed the chance to recover. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new responsibilities, and new challenges. The cycle never truly stopped. Seasons changed, years passed, and generations followed one another. But daily life continued with remarkable consistency. If we could step back and view medieval Germany from above, we would see thousands of villages, towns, monasteries, farms, and castles spread across the landscape. Each contained people living their own stories. Some experienced prosperity, others hardship. Some lived long lives, while others faced misfortune at an early age. Together, however, they formed a vast human tapestry stretching across centuries. What makes this world so fascinating is not only how different it was from our own, but also how familiar certain aspects remain. People still cared deeply about family. They still searched for security, friendship, and meaning. They still worried about the future and hoped for better days ahead. Technology, politics, and society have changed dramatically, but many human emotions have remained surprisingly constant. And so the story of medieval Germany continues quietly through the memories left behind in ancient buildings, old traditions, and historical records. Though the people themselves are long gone, their lives still echo through time. Their work shaped the communities around them. Their traditions influenced future generations, and their experiences became part of the larger story of human history. In the silence of the medieval night, that story carries on, waiting to be remembered once again. As we move deeper into this quiet medieval landscape, it becomes easier to understand why community mattered so much. Life was rarely faced alone. When a barn needed repairing, neighbours often helped. When a family experienced hardship, others sometimes provided support. During harvest season, entire communities worked together to gather crops before bad weather could ruin months of effort. Cooperation was not merely a kindness. It was often necessary for survival. The changing seasons also gave people a strong sense of time. Unlike the modern world, where calendars and clocks dominate daily life, medieval Germans often measured the year through natural events. The first signs of spring, the growth of crops, the harvest, and the arrival of winter all served as important markers. Religious festivals added another layer to this rhythm, creating familiar moments that returned year after year. These recurring patterns provided comfort because they connected people to both the past and the future. Many medieval villages remained relatively unchanged for long periods. A child born in one century might recognise much of the same landscape that had existed during the lifetime of grandparents and great-grandparents. Houses were repaired rather than replaced, traditions were preserved, and local customs continued across generations. This stability created a strong sense of continuity. While the outside world changed slowly, village life often seemed timeless. Of course, challenges never disappeared entirely. Harsh winters, poor harvests, illness, and occasional conflicts remained part of reality. Yet people adapted because adaptation was essential. They learned from experience, shared knowledge, and developed practical solutions whenever possible. Resilience became one of the defining characteristics of medieval society. Looking back from the present, it is tempting to focus only on what medieval people lacked. They lived without modern medicine, technology, and conveniences. But they also possessed strengths that are easy to overlook. Many had deep connections to their communities, close relationships with family members, and a strong awareness of the natural world around them. Their lives were often difficult, yet they were also filled with purpose, routine, and belonging. As another evening settles over medieval Germany, village fires glow softly against the darkness. Families gather indoors, travellers seek shelter, and church bells mark the passing of time. The world feels quieter, slower, and more connected to nature than our own. And within that world, countless ordinary people continue living their stories, unaware that centuries later others will still be curious about the lives they once led. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about medieval Germany is not its castles, its rulers, or even its famous historical events. It is the simple fact that millions of ordinary people managed to build lives in circumstances that would seem incredibly challenging today. They woke before sunrise, worked hard throughout the day, cared for their families, and found ways to endure uncertainty. Their achievements were often small and personal rather than grand and public. But together those achievements sustained entire communities for centuries. In many villages, knowledge was passed from one generation to the next through observation and practice. A father taught his son how to work the fields. A mother showed her daughter how to prepare food and manage a household. Craftsmen trained apprentices, sharing techniques refined over many years. This constant transfer of experience helped preserve valuable skills and ensured that communities could continue functioning despite changing circumstances. The natural environment remained a constant companion throughout life. Forests provided resources, rivers supported trade and travel, and fertile land offered opportunities for agriculture. People understood that their well-being depended upon maintaining a careful relationship with the world around them. They paid attention to weather patterns, seasonal changes, and local conditions because survival often depended on such knowledge. Even during peaceful periods, life required effort and patience. Buildings had to be maintained, tools repaired, and food preserved. Every season brought new responsibilities. Yet within these routines, people created meaningful lives. Friendships developed, families grew, Celebrations were shared and traditions endured. These experiences gave purpose to everyday existence and helped communities remain strong across generations. Today, many traces of medieval Germany can still be found. Ancient churches continue standing in town centres. Castle ruins overlook valleys and rivers. Historic streets follow paths established centuries ago. These reminders connect the present with the distant past, allowing us to imagine the people who once walked those same roads and looked upon those same landscapes. Their world was very different from ours, yet their lives were shaped by familiar emotions. They experienced love and loss, hope and fear, success and disappointment. They worried about the future and cared deeply for those around them. In this way, the people of medieval Germany remain connected to us, despite the centuries that separate our lives from theirs. Their story is not only a chapter of history, it is also a reminder of the enduring qualities that have always been part of the human experience. As our long walk through medieval Germany continues, it is worth pausing to imagine just how different the pace of life felt compared to today. News travelled slowly, sometimes taking weeks or months to reach distant communities. Many people spent their entire lives within a relatively small area, becoming deeply familiar with every road, field, and forest path nearby. The world beyond their region often existed more in stories than in direct experience. Yet this slower pace also allowed people to develop a strong connection to their surroundings and to the communities they called home. For many villagers, the local church was one of the largest and most impressive buildings they would ever see. Its bells marked important moments throughout the day and throughout life itself. Births, marriages, festivals, and funerals all passed through its doors. The church served not only as a religious centre, but also as a place where people gathered, exchanged information, and strengthened community bonds. In many ways, it stood at the heart of village life. Work remained the foundation of survival. Every loaf of bread, every repaired roof, and every harvested field represented hours of effort. There was little separation between daily labour and daily life because the two were closely connected. Families often worked together, sharing responsibilities according to age, ability, and circumstance. This cooperation helped ensure that essential tasks were completed and that households remained stable. At the same time, people found opportunities to appreciate beauty in their world. They admired the changing colours of the seasons, listened to songs performed during celebrations, and took pride in well-crafted objects created by skilled hands. Beauty did not always require wealth. Sometimes it appeared in simple moments: sunlight over a field, laughter during a festival, or the comfort of gathering with loved ones after a long day. The passing centuries brought gradual changes, but many aspects of medieval life remained surprisingly consistent. Communities adapted while preserving traditions that linked them to earlier generations. Through persistence and cooperation, People continued building lives that reflected both necessity and hope. And so, beneath the shadow of castles, beside flowing rivers, and among villages surrounded by forests, the people of medieval Germany carried on. Their days were often difficult, but they were also meaningful. Through countless ordinary actions repeated across generations, they helped create a society that would leave a lasting mark on history. Their voices may be quiet now, but their story continues to echo through the landscapes they once called home. If there is one lesson that medieval Germany teaches us, it may be the importance of endurance. The people who lived during this era faced challenges that could not be solved quickly. A poor harvest could affect an entire year. Rebuilding after a storm or fire might take months. Learning a trade often required many years of dedication. Patience was not simply a virtue. It was a necessity. Success frequently came through steady effort rather than sudden change. Children growing up in medieval villages learned this lesson early. They watched adults work through difficulties and understood that survival depended on persistence. Skills were developed gradually. Knowledge accumulated over time, and responsibilities increased with age. By the time young people reached adulthood, they were already familiar with the realities of hard work and community life. The passing of generations created a strong sense of continuity. Grandparents could share stories from decades earlier, describing events that younger villagers had never witnessed. In this way, memory connected the past to the present. Traditions survived because people valued them enough to pass them forward. Every generation inherited knowledge from those who came before and added its own experiences before handing that knowledge onward. Across the countryside, life continued beneath the same sun, moon, and stars that shine today. Farmers looked toward the horizon each morning. Travelers followed winding roads between towns. Merchants carried goods along rivers and trade routes. Monks copied texts by candlelight. Families gathered around evening fires, though separated by distance and circumstance. These individuals were all part of a larger world that stretched across the German lands. Modern life often moves so quickly that it can be difficult to imagine such a different pace. Yet there is something calming about this older rhythm. Seasons mattered. Communities mattered. Family mattered. People understood that many of the most important things in life required time, patience, and cooperation. Their world was not easy, but it was deeply connected to the natural cycles that governed everyday existence. As another medieval night settles over the villages and forests of Germany, windows glow softly in the darkness. The day's work is finished. Conversations grow quieter, and tired families prepare for rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, just as it has for countless generations before. And within that simple cycle lies the enduring story of medieval Germany. A story carried forward by ordinary people whose lives helped shape the course of history. As we remain a little longer in this medieval world, imagine the feeling of standing beside a village well early in the morning. The village is only beginning to wake. A few people are already collecting water. Others are preparing animals for the day's work. And smoke starts rising from chimneys into the cool air. Nothing appears hurried. The day unfolds gradually, guided by routines that have existed for generations. For the people living here, this rhythm feels natural and familiar. Many medieval Germans rarely thought about making history. They were focused on practical concerns such as growing enough food, protecting their families, and preparing for the coming winter. Yet history was being created all around them through these ordinary actions. Every field planted, every house repaired, and every child raised contributed to the continuation of society. The grand events recorded in chronicles depended upon the efforts of countless individuals whose names were never written down. There was also a strong connection between people and the places where they lived. Villagers often remained in the same locations for centuries. Families became attached to particular pieces of land, local traditions, and community landmarks. The church, the market square, nearby forests, and familiar roads formed the centre of daily life. These places carried memories and stories that linked generations together. Even during difficult times, people continued looking toward the future. Parents hoped their children would have opportunities to build stable lives. Craftsmen worked to improve their skills. Farmers prepared for the next growing season. Communities repaired damage after storms and rebuilt after setbacks. This quiet optimism helped people move forward despite uncertainty. They understood that challenges were temporary, while the community itself could endure. When we study medieval Germany today, we often see castles, churches, and historical records. But behind every structure and document stood real people living ordinary lives. They laughed with friends, worried about loved ones, celebrated special occasions, and faced hardships with determination. Their experiences may belong to another era, but their emotions remain recognizable even now. As evening approaches once again, shadows lengthen across fields and village streets. Workers return home, animals settle down for the night, and church bells echo softly through the air. The medieval world grows quiet. Yet within that quietness lives the story of generations who worked, hoped, and persevered. Their lives became part of a history far larger than themselves, leaving traces that continue to inspire curiosity centuries later. The longer we spend imagining medieval Germany, the easier it becomes to see that history is not only made by extraordinary moments. Most of life was shaped by ordinary days. Days when nothing dramatic happened. Days spent working in fields, repairing tools, caring for animals, preparing meals, and talking with neighbours. These quiet moments filled far more of people's lives than wars or political events ever did. And yet they were just as important, because they formed the foundation upon which communities survived and grew. For medieval villagers, the future was never completely certain. Weather could change unexpectedly, crops could fail, and illness could appear without warning. Because of this uncertainty, people often learned to appreciate stability whenever they found it. a healthy family, a successful harvest, and peaceful relations with neighbours were considered valuable blessings. These simple goals guided much of everyday life. The passing years also brought visible changes to individuals and communities. Children who once played in village streets eventually became workers, parents, and elders. New houses were built while old ones were repaired or replaced. Trees planted by one generation provided shade for the next. Life moved forward steadily, connecting the past to the future through countless small actions. In many ways, medieval Germany was a world built upon relationships. Families depended on one another. Neighbours shared responsibilities. Craftsmen worked with customers and apprentices. Religious leaders guided their communities. Even travellers and merchants helped connect distant regions through the exchange of goods and information. These networks of relationships gave society its strength and allowed people to face challenges together. Today, centuries later, much of that medieval world has disappeared. The people are gone, and many of the buildings have changed. Yet traces remain. Ancient churches still stand. Castle walls still overlook valleys. Old town centres continue following street patterns established long ago. These reminders allow us to glimpse the lives of those who came before us. As darkness settles gently across the medieval countryside once again, the world grows calm. Fires flicker behind windows, conversations fade, and another day comes to an end. The people living here cannot know what the future holds, but they continue forward with quiet determination. Through their labour, traditions, and perseverance, they leave behind a legacy that survives long after their own lifetimes have ended. And in that enduring legacy, the story of medieval Germany continues to live on. As the centuries slowly unfolded, the people of medieval Germany remained connected by something deeper than roads, castles, or trade routes. They were connected by shared experiences. Nearly everyone understood the effort required to survive a harsh winter, the relief that came with a successful harvest, and the comfort of gathering with family after a long day. These common experiences created a sense of understanding that united communities across the region. Many medieval people viewed life as part of a larger cycle. They watched the seasons return year after year and saw generations follow one another in much the same way. Children grew, adults aged, and new families formed. This pattern provided a sense of continuity that helped people accept the uncertainties of life. While individuals came and went, the community endured. There was also a deep respect for experience. Older members of society were valued not because they possessed wealth or power, but because they carried knowledge gathered over many years. They remembered previous harvests, difficult winters, and important events that younger generations had never witnessed. Their advice often guided decisions affecting families and villagers alike. In a world where written information was limited, memory itself became an important resource. At times, medieval life could feel isolated, especially in small rural communities surrounded by forests and fields. Yet, even the most remote villages were connected to larger networks through religion, trade, and shared traditions. Pilgrims travelled across regions. Merchants carried goods between towns. And religious celebrations linked people to communities far beyond their own. Slowly but steadily, ideas moved from place to place, shaping the world in subtle ways. Looking back now, it becomes clear that the true strength of medieval Germany was not found in its castles or armies alone. It was found in the resilience of ordinary people. They adapted to changing conditions, supported one another during difficult times, and continued building lives despite countless challenges. Their determination allowed communities to survive through centuries of uncertainty. As another quiet evening settles over the landscape, the familiar sounds of medieval life begin to fade. The day's work is finished, roads grow empty, and homes fill with the warm glow of firelight. Somewhere beyond the village, a river continues flowing through the darkness, just as it has for generations. And while the world around it slowly changes, the story of the people who lived here remains woven into the land itself, waiting to be remembered by those willing to listen. If we stayed in medieval Germany for one final season, we would notice how deeply people understood the value of persistence. Rarely did success arrive quickly. Fields required months of care before producing crops. Apprentices trained for years before mastering a craft. Families spent decades building stable lives. Patience was woven into nearly every aspect of existence. People learned that meaningful results often came through steady effort, rather than immediate rewards. This outlook shaped the way communities approached challenges. When storms damaged buildings, they rebuilt them. When harvests were poor, they prepared as best they could for the following year. When difficulties appeared, most people focused not on changing the entire world, but on improving the small part of it that belonged to them. These practical efforts allowed villages and towns to survive through generations of uncertainty. The landscape itself became a silent witness to countless lives. Forests watched generations come and go. Rivers continued flowing past villages long after individual families disappeared from memory. Hills, valleys, and fields remained familiar even as society gradually changed around them. For medieval people, these natural features provided a sense of permanence in a world where human life was often unpredictable. Many of the values that guided daily life were surprisingly simple. Loyalty to family, responsibility toward neighbours, respect for tradition, and commitment to hard work were widely admired qualities. People did not always live up to these ideals, but they remained important goals that influenced behaviour throughout society. Such values helped maintain stability and cooperation within communities. As the Middle Ages moved toward their later centuries, change slowly gathered momentum. Trade expanded, towns grew larger, and new ideas began spreading across Europe. Most individuals could not see the full significance of these developments. Yet they were living through a period that would eventually help shape the modern world. History often changes gradually, almost invisibly, before its effects become clear. For now, however, the medieval countryside remains peaceful. Evening shadows stretch across fields. Church bells echo through the air, and families gather indoors after another day of work. The routines of life continue much as they always have. In these quiet moments, we are reminded that the true story of medieval Germany belongs not only to rulers and warriors, but also to ordinary people whose patience, resilience, and determination carried their communities forward through centuries of change. Their legacy remains part of the story that still echoes across Germany today. As we continue through this peaceful historical journey, imagine a traveller standing on a hill overlooking the German countryside near the end of the Middle Ages. Below him are fields divided into narrow strips, clusters of homes gathered around a church, and roads winding toward distant towns. From this vantage point, life appears calm and orderly, yet every house contains its own story, its own struggles, and its own dreams for the future. The traveller might notice how closely people lived with the natural world. The success of a village depended on fertile soil, reliable rainfall, healthy animals, and favourable seasons. Unlike modern societies, medieval communities could not easily separate themselves from nature's influence. Every storm, drought, or unusually cold winter carried consequences. This dependence encouraged people to pay careful attention to their surroundings and respect the forces they could not control. He would also see evidence of cooperation everywhere. Fields were cultivated by families working together. Buildings were repaired through shared effort. Religious festivals brought entire communities into common celebration. Even when disagreements occurred, people understood that they relied on one another for survival. Isolation was rarely practical. Community remained one of the strongest foundations of medieval life. As years passed, children inherited not only land and possessions, but also stories, traditions, and responsibilities. Parents taught practical skills while elders shared lessons learned through experience. In this way, knowledge moved steadily from one generation to the next. Much of what people knew about farming, craftsmanship, and daily life came from those who had lived before them. The past remained present through memory and tradition. Today, when we think about medieval Germany, it is easy to focus on what people lacked compared to modern society. Yet they possessed forms of knowledge and connection that were deeply valuable. They understood the rhythms of the seasons, maintained strong community ties, and often had a clear sense of their place within the world around them. Their lives were challenging, but they were also rich with meaning, purpose, and shared experience. As evening settles once again over the villages and forests, another day quietly comes to an end. Fires glow within homes, stars begin appearing overhead, and the sounds of work gradually fade into silence. The people of medieval Germany rest, unaware that centuries later, others will still be fascinated by the world they inhabited. through their ordinary lives. They created an extraordinary legacy, one that continues to invite us back into the past to better understand the enduring story of humanity itself. As the medieval centuries slowly drew closer to their end, the people living across the German lands could not know that the world around them was beginning to change. New ideas were emerging, trade networks were expanding, and towns were becoming increasingly important. Yet, in many villages, daily life still followed patterns that had existed for generations. Farmers continued working their fields. Craftsmen practiced their trades, and families gathered each evening in the familiar comfort of their homes. There is something remarkable about the quiet continuity of these lives. While kings rose and fell, while borders shifted and political struggles unfolded, ordinary people continued doing what was necessary to keep their communities alive. They planted crops, raised children, cared for animals, repaired buildings, and supported one another through difficult times. Their efforts rarely appeared in official records, but without them society could not have functioned. The passage of time was often felt through personal milestones rather than historical events. A child's first steps, a wedding celebration, the completion of a new home, or the birth of another generation carried profound meaning. These moments connected people to the future and reminded them that life continued despite uncertainty. Hope often existed in simple forms, rooted in family and community rather than grand ambitions. Looking across medieval Germany as a whole, one sees a landscape shaped by countless acts of perseverance. Forests were cleared to create farmland. Villages grew into towns. Roads connected distant regions. Churches, bridges, and homes were built through years of labour. Each generation added something of its own before passing the world on to those who followed. Progress was slow, but it was real. Perhaps that is why the medieval period remains so fascinating. It reveals how people lived without many of the conveniences we consider essential today, yet still created meaningful and enduring communities. Their world was often difficult, but it was also filled with determination, faith, friendship, and resilience. These qualities helped them navigate challenges that would seem overwhelming to many modern observers. Now, as another quiet night settles over the countryside, the lights of medieval homes grow dim. Families prepare for sleep, villages become silent, and the stars shine above fields and forests that have witnessed generations come and go. The story of medieval Germany continues to drift through time, carried by memories, traditions, and the enduring traces left behind by ordinary people whose lives became part of history's long and remarkable journey. And so, our journey through medieval Germany slowly comes to an end. The villages grow quiet, the roads empty, and the last lights fade behind wooden shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings softly across the sleeping countryside. The forests stand still beneath the moonlight. Rivers continue their endless journey through valleys. And ancient castles keep watch from high hills just as they have for centuries. The people we have met throughout this journey were not famous kings or legendary warriors. Most were ordinary men and women whose names have long been forgotten. They worked the land, cared for their families, prayed in their local churches, and faced the challenges of life with courage and determination. They experienced joy and sorrow, success and hardship, hope and uncertainty. In many ways, they were not so different from us. Their world lacked modern technology, fast transportation, and instant communication. Yet it possessed something unique, a deep connection to community, tradition, and the natural world. Life moved more slowly, allowing people to follow the rhythm of the seasons and the passage of generations. Every harvest, every festival, and every family gathering became part of a larger story stretching across centuries. Today, many traces of medieval Germany still remain. Ancient cathedrals continue rising above town squares. Castle ruins overlook rivers and forests. Old streets follow paths first walked by people who lived hundreds of years ago. These places remind us that history is not only found in books. It lives on in landscapes, buildings, and traditions that survive long after those who created them are gone. As we leave this medieval world behind, take one last look at the quiet village resting beneath the stars. The fields are calm, the homes are silent, and tomorrow's work can wait until sunrise. For now, everything is peaceful. The worries of the day have faded, and only the gentle sounds of the night remain. Thank you for joining me on this journey through medieval Germany. As the moon drifts across the sky and the countryside settles into silence, allow yourself to relax and rest. Let the castles, forests, villages, and distant church bells slowly fade into the darkness. And as history drifts softly into the night, may you enjoy a peaceful and restful sleep. Good night.